Let's talk about composable architecture. There are few opinionated, I would say, scenarios or building blocks on the market, but Toke, what is your point of view on composable architecture? How should merchants build their architecture, and what would be a real good progress to get to a target architecture for composability?
Oh, you're starting a big one here. So my initial start is actually what you're showing here. I like this Gartner model because it tells you a lot about making sure you have all the pieces in place before you start talking about technology, whether it should be this CMS or that CMS. Talk a little bit about it. Make sure you are aligned about what is the vision, what is the strategy, and what are the metrics that we are measuring success on. Because they are actually stating very much which direction you should take. It's also very important to make sure that you agree as a whole organization what is the customer experiences, how do we collaborate around the experience that we are creating, but also the processes that is needed there. And as I tend to say, old processes with new systems is just waste of money. So
Yeah.
making sure that you really understand what are the processes that you're aiming towards having. And then make sure that you really also understand what is your current foundation, because you need at some point during the transition towards a composable setup, if you're going that direction, you need to be able to handle some of the legacy from the existing setup. So you need to
Mhm.
understand where you're coming from and where you're going to. And these alignments are truly important. And the way that I like to tend to think about composable setup is think in layers. Gartner
Maybe.
a couple of years ago made this layered approach where they say the pace layered approach is a strong foundational for going composable. And I do agree. Need to understand that where are you doing your differentiation? You're doing that in a system of innovation. That is typical your
Mhm.
front ends, your customer experiences. But you also have a below a system of differentiations. That's the unique processes that actually help you be able to serve those in unique innovations. And then you have the basics. That's the system of records. That's your ERP system of this world. You tend to spend a lot of money on system of records and very few money on where you truly make your innovation.
Yeah.
But where you do see the innovation and the return on investment, they are coming from the experiences. They're not coming from the system of records. But if you start to think in layers, you can way more easily understand, oh, I need to change this small component here, take it in and take it out. And that's the promise of composability and composable setup. But you need to
And
think in layers before you do anything else. Point to point
absolutely.
integrations, that's a no go. And you really need to consider this in layers.
Absolutely.
Also,
Let me maybe at that point here that you also should steer the investments into that case. Yeah. So that if you're got the return on the system of innovation, you should really put the investments there. And if you observe that you just spend actually 70% of the spendings on your system of records by keeping them up and running, maintenance, that on the other flip side of the medal means that you're only spending 30% of innovation. And if the customer expectation is rising at the same time, that means also that you will fall behind the market. And another pretty good point, which you mentioned, and maybe I'm going back to that slide again, is having that alignment, yeah, from the business to the customer and the IT. What we're actually observing is that there is an alignment maybe between the IT and the internal business, and they are getting a mutual understanding to each other, which was also not the case some years before.
yeah.
Then business and the customer has a kind of alignment, but there is no holistic alignment over business, customer, and IT, which serves in the end the goal for the target architecture in that case.
I totally agree. But if you agree on those two things, then the important question is how to get there. And that's the transition. There's
Absolutely.
many ways to do that kind of transition. And to me, at least, many is on their third or fourth wave of digitalization, meaning that they have made some huge investment in the past where we say now we are on a platform where we can operate. But after a few years, they start to see, oh, that platform is not the right platform for us, so they should do something else. But because they are on their fourth wave, for instance, then they have implemented a PIM system. Don't change the PIM system because it works. Then you need to be able to bridge that to a new world, to the new reality that you're going. So it's important to understand this coexistence and transition from an old setup to a new setup. We briefly touched upon it in another episode, but that's really, really crucial to understand this. And one thing that I really like to get out there is that there's only one really successful Big Bang, and it's not in IT. So
Yeah.
you need to have that bridging one way or the other. But you have a really good point here as well, I know.
Yeah, I would say you're totally right. And having that transition in your mind, yeah, it's really the key, because there are many consultants and players out there who can draw you shiny architecture of the future, yeah, by saying, hey, this is your legacy stack, this is how it should look like in the future. But how you get from A to B, and also having, I would say, the real life experience to do that, not only the technical way of thinking, that's the secret sauce. Because in the end, you have to imagine you are basically replacing the engine of a running car while driving it. That's basically the scenario where we are heading. So we have to have that engine swapped while driving, because we can't stop the car or our business and just shut everything down for a year and then come up and say, hey, we have a new ERP or a new PIM up and running. So this transition path there is really also the secret sauce which you mentioned, and having that sliced down in steps is the secret sauce, I would say, also to get back the trust of the stakeholders, show the business that you can, as IT, do and operate things, and so on and so forth.
I totally agree, and then I would even say the first step, and I will leave that as almost my final remark, is that I really like this quote from a French philosopher who actually says, "Perfection is achieved not when there's nothing more to add, but when there's nothing left to take away." We need to remember that in the journey that we are embarking on, from old system setup to a new system setup. Don't push all the other stuff because we have been doing them for 20, 30 years. Continue to push them from one setup to another, because they might not add value. They might just add more complexity. They are not the perfection that you're trying to achieve. So I really like this quote from a business perspective. You can actually help IT a lot. Some organization, they hate IT because, oh, it's the slow ones down in IT and it takes forever to get something through. But that's because they're carrying the burden of the many decisions in the past. So business can really help IT quite a lot by just thinking like this old philosopher says here. How can we help IT carve away legacy with some very simple, maybe sometimes hard decisions, to take something
Absolutely.
away that we shouldn't do anymore? Then it's easier to migrate into a new setup if we agree that we shouldn't do this anymore.
And I would say there's nothing to add.